What's up, Taiwan? I'm Jeremy Olivier with news from here in Taiwan and around the world. This year's APEC summit is officially underway. For the next 2 days, leaders from around the world will be in South Korea discussing some of the Asia-Pacific economy's most pressing issues. Keynes Karanta has more.
Here in Gyeongju, South Korea, the Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation, or APEC summit, has begun. Representatives of 21 economies that make up more than 50% of the global GDP are inside that building. As member economies began their first meeting, South Korean President Lee Jae-myung presented the summit as a way to tackle the, quote, turbulent shifts in the international order that he says are happening right now.
무역 질서가 거센 변화를 맞이하며
As we face huge change in the free trade order, global economic uncertainty is deepening, and the momentum of trade and investment is weakening. The technical revolution brought on by AI is presenting unprecedented challenges, but also opportunities. While it's going to be a difficult challenge, I believe the answer in overcoming it is in the path that APEC has been on from the beginning.
Over the next 2 days, they're expected to discuss topics like maintaining free trade and improving regional economic integration. In his speech, Chinese President Xi Jinping largely focused on these themes, emphasizing the importance of maintaining an open economic environment in the region, continuing to promote trade and investment, and ensuring stable supply chains. As for Taiwan, the summit presents an opportunity to emphasize its importance on the global stage. APEC is one of the few international organizations it's able to participate in. China objects to its inclusion in most world bodies. And there's been some attention on how Taiwan was presented on Friday. On a broadcast inside the press center, Taiwan's flag was shown on screen as its representative Lin Xin-yi shook hands with Lee before entering the first meeting. That's significant because Taiwan participates in APEC under the name Chinese Taipei, not Taiwan, due to pressure from China. As Taiwan seeks to lower the 20% tariffs the U.S. slapped on the country's goods, Taiwan's top trade negotiator said she met with a U.S. trade official on Thursday on the sidelines of an APEC meeting.
我这次出席这个双部长会议啊，是他的副贸易代表 Rick Switzer。你们大概好奇我有没有跟他往来？有，我确实有跟他往来。但是呢，双方基于互信呢，我们跟他的谈话的内容呢，我们会在适当的时期跟大家来说明一下。
And Taiwan's government says the two sides will continue to talk after the APEC summit ends to reach a consensus and ultimately a trade agreement. They are currently focused on negotiating a lower tariff rate and supply chain cooperation. Other than trade, Taiwan's delegation also says a big focus for meetings with other countries is AI. They said AI innovation and supply chains require cooperation with other countries, so building those partnerships is one of their goals. There are sure to be many more significant moments here Friday and Saturday, both inside and outside of these formal APEC meetings, as leaders gather here to discuss some of the regional economy's most pressing issues. The South Korean government also says that member economies are close to reaching a consensus on a joint declaration, so that's something that we'll be watching out for as well. Justin Wu and Cadence Koranta in Gyeongju, South Korea for TaiwanPlus.
On the sidelines of APEC, talks between Donald Trump and his Chinese counterpart Xi Jinping drew attention because of what wasn't discussed, Taiwan. To unpack what their meeting means for U.S.-China ties and Taiwan, reporter Leslie Liao spoke to David Sachs from the Council on Foreign Relations.
U.S. President Donald Trump and Chinese President Xi Jinping just wrapped up their first face-to-face meeting in 6 years. Is the outcome what you expected at all?
I would say that the meeting is not as bad as it could have been. I think there was a lot of concern going into the meeting that A, Xi Jinping would press Trump on Taiwan, and there was some reporting to that effect in the weeks prior, that B, Xi Jinping would press Trump to allow the export of very powerful NVIDIA chips that China doesn't have access to. And so I think that the two kind of most dangerous scenarios did not come to pass. But what we know, the bottom line here, for me at least, is that Beijing saw that it has a big card that it can play against the United States, the rare earths card, that the United States doesn't really have a way in the short term of de-risking from China on rare earths, finding alternate suppliers, building a domestic supply chain here at home. And, I think in China's view, its decision to hit back and hit back hard, escalate the trade war, paid dividends. So I think that if you're sitting in Beijing, if you're Xi Jinping, I think you're fairly happy with the outcome of this meeting.
What do you make of Trump's comments that Taiwan didn't come up in his talks with Xi?
I expected going into this meeting that both sides would prioritize a kind of ceasefire in the economic realm, which is exactly what we got. But I do think that Xi Jinping is going to have a much bigger opportunity to press Trump on Taiwan during his visit to Beijing, which he said is slated for April of next year.
Now, in a recent article, you said that the U.S. could leverage these trade talks to gain some stability in the Taiwan Strait. Is there any precedent for that?
In my view, the status quo or the way that cross-strait relations have evolved, Beijing views that as in its favor, right? I mean, the gray zone coercion continues to increase. The military activity around Taiwan continues to intensify. It doesn't really pay a price for that. Part of what I tried to do is push back against the notion that a U.S. declaration that it opposes Taiwan independence would be a good idea, or cutting security cooperation with Taiwan, or not advocating for Taiwan's participation in international organizations. I think those are all bad paths to go down. But I do think that we could potentially negotiate with the Chinese some kind of mutual military pullback. Now, the good thing about working in this realm would be that steps on both sides would be reversible. So if the Chinese don't meet their commitments, the United States could, undo what it agreed to do. Whereas the kind of statements on Taiwan independence, once you've made those, that's a new baseline for U.S. policy. You can't really undo those.
That was David Sachs from the Council on Foreign Relations. President Trump's surprise order for the first U.S. nuclear tests in decades has rivals cautious and the UN alarmed. But some see that this show of U.S. power could hand China an opportunity to advance its own arsenal. John Van Trieste reports.
Capping off a whirlwind Asia trip with a nuclear surprise. U.S. President Donald Trump has ordered new tests of U.S. weapons after a 33-year freeze. It's been decades since the world's three leading nuclear powers, Russia, the U.S., and China, have done nuclear tests. The sudden order came just before a meeting with China's President Xi Jinping in South Korea. While in the air Thursday, Trump told reporters about his thinking.
It had to do with others. They seem to all be nuclear testing. We have more nuclear weapons than anybody. We don't do testing. We've halted it many years ago. But with others doing testing, I think it's appropriate that we do also.
Arms monitors generally agree it's actually Russia, not the U.S., that has the world's biggest nuclear arsenal. And while Moscow has recently tested a nuclear-powered torpedo and a nuclear-capable cruise missile, post-Soviet Russia has never done a nuclear test. The Kremlin suggested Trump may be misinformed and said that Russia won't take the return of U.S. tests after so many years lightly.
The U.S. is a sovereign country, which has the right to make its sovereign decisions. But I want to recall President Putin's statement, which has been repeated many times. If someone departs from the moratorium, Russia will act accordingly.
China says it hopes the U.S. tests won't go ahead. Beijing's doubled its arsenal over the past 5 years, and last year launched an ICBM over the Pacific. But it, too, stopped nuclear testing in the 1990s. And now it's appealing to a test ban treaty the U.S. has signed but never ratified.
中方希望美方切实遵守全面禁止核试验条约的义务和暂停核试验的承诺，以实际行动维护国际核裁军与核不扩散体系，维护全球战略平衡与稳定。
At the United Nations, strong rejection of Trump's plan. The global body says tests not only heighten the risk of a disastrous conflict, but have also caused harm. Outcry over testing's impact to human health and the environment is one reason why it's largely stopped since the 1990s.
The Secretary General has repeatedly asserted that current nuclear risks are already alarmingly high, and all actions that could lead to miscalculation or escalation with catastrophic consequences must be avoided. And as he has said, we must never forget the disastrous legacy of over 2,000 nuclear weapons tests carried out over the last 80 years, and that nuclear testing can never be permitted under any circumstances.
This doesn't seem likely to sway the U.S., with Vice President J.D. Vance saying it's just about making sure the arsenal still works like it's supposed to.
The Russians have a large nuclear arsenal. The Chinese have a large nuclear arsenal. Sometimes you've got to test it to make sure that it's functioning and working properly. We've been working very closely, even with nations that we don't have the best relations with, to try to limit nuclear proliferation. The president's going to keep on working on that.
But analysts say the U.S. can check up on its arsenal without having to explode anything. This has led some to think what Trump actually meant to say was that the U.S. would test nuclear delivery platforms, like the missiles that carry warheads. But one analyst warns that if Trump does indeed intend to restart explosive testing, it could hand China a big opportunity.
China has done less than 100 nuclear tests, and a lot of Chinese experts and officials have pointed out that China might be at a disadvantage in terms of knowledge of its arsenal and weapons designs because it just doesn't have as much testing data. And so if the taboo against nuclear testing was broken, if there was a return to more nuclear tests, China stands to gain way more from this than the United States would.
Trump's policy pronouncements can often be hard to parse, at least until more official information is publicly available. But now, after a long lull, it seems a new age of nuclear testing could be on the way, with the end result hard to predict. Andy Xue and John Van Trieste for TaiwanPlus.
Taiwan's president watched the country's new U.S.-bought tanks enter service. But with cheap drones now able to take out expensive systems like these tanks, what can Taiwan do to make sure it's getting the most out of its newest equipment? Alan Liu reports.
Here in Hsinchu, the country's first battalion of the Abrams tanks is officially entering service. These U.S.-made tanks are some of the most powerful in the world, and they are expected to give the Army a major boost in firepower and mobility.
现在，我将战备任务与责任交接给你们，请你们务必勤训精练。 持续守护国家安全。
The M1A2T Abrams are replacing Taiwan's older fleets of CM11 tanks and mark significant improvements in Taiwan's arsenal. Taiwan's President Lai Ching-te was there to see the new military hardware presented.
新兴单位的成军是全新的挑战，更是展现国军迈向新训练、新思维。 新装备、新科技的重要里程碑。
Experts agree that introducing new tanks comes with new challenges. Abrams crews require a lot of training. The vehicles themselves are very expensive, and the war in Ukraine shows that even the most advanced tanks can be taken out by cheap drones.
你必须配备更多的反无人机，比如反无人机的装甲车跟在战车车队后面的，或许。 这些战甲车队在未来这战场上比较有生存的空间。
Some of Taiwan's fleets of Abrams tanks carry out live fire exercises in July, giving the public a chance to see what its 120mm cannon can do. When paired with a powerful engine and dense modern armor, it's a weapon system the military hopes will give it an edge. Taiwan is expected to receive the final batch of the M1A2T tanks in early 2026, bringing the total number to over 100. For now, the military says all of them will be deployed in northern Taiwan. Fu Huahong and Ellen Lu in Hsinchu, Taiwan for TaiwanPlus.
Taiwan has secured more medals at the 2025 Asian Youth Games in Bahrain as the event comes to a close. Taiwanese athlete Lin Wanrong bagged bronze in the women's singles table tennis after being defeated by her Chinese opponent Yao Ruixuan. Team Taiwan so far has won 7 gold, 9 silver, and 24 bronze at the Games. The closing ceremony is set to take place on Friday. Thanks for watching What's Up Taiwan. Finally, we head over to the White House for a Halloween celebration. I'm Jeremy Olivier. Take care and see you next time.